In Rise of Kingdoms, there are a ton of ways to do field fighting, whether it be through Lost Canyon, Sunset Canyon, even Ark of Osiris, or even Champions of Olympia. There are so many ways to fight players in this game. Most events will involve some form of fighting, and of course, you've even got your normal open field and garrison fighting. But what about the Ancient Ruins? It's kind of a niche thing that actually does play quite a big role in your KVK, and you might be getting a ton of kills from it. So today, I will discuss how to do the Ancient Ruins. I'll discuss, obviously, how they work and, like, how the event actually works on its own. I will discuss what to do before you even start fighting to hopefully improve your trades or improve your alliance's chance of winning. I will discuss what you should be fighting with, whether it be commanders or which commanders you own that you should be using. And finally, I'll discuss some tips for actually fighting. So when you're in there fighting, what should you do to get the best trades? So if you want to get better trades in the Ancient Ruins, then you definitely want to check out the rest of the video. Let's begin with discussing how the Ancient Ruins actually works. And the first thing to note is, once the Ancient Ruins first unlocks, it goes on, I think, a day and 15 or 17 hour cooldown. It's a very, very weird number. It's not like 2 days, it's like a day and like 14 or 15 hours. And after that, this shield will come down. And once that's down, the ruins are up for the taking. And the way you claim these ruins is by having at least one march inside of the ruin from your coalition. So if your coalition has one march inside of these ruins, you will claim that for your coalition. Keep in mind though, if you want to claim it, there has to be no other marches inside the ruin. So let's say there is an enemy coalition trying to take that ruin from you and they have one march in there as well. No one is able to claim it until either one of the marches steps out of this dotted square. There will also be stalkers which will spawn in every, I'm pretty sure, 10 minutes. And if those are inside of the ruins as well, you cannot capture the ruins. So you have to make sure that these stalkers plus any enemy marches are not inside of the ruins. This also means that you can't just outnumber your enemies. If there are 2,000 of your marches plus one enemy march inside of the ruins, you cannot capture it until that one march is defeated. So to capture the ruins, you have to have no stalkers in there, plus only your marches. It can be one march of your own or 1,000, it doesn't matter, as long as there are no enemies and no stalkers. Once you've captured the ruins, you cannot lose it, and it cannot be contested until every single march inside of the ruins has been defeated. So if you had 100 marches in here, and an enemy came out with 200 and wiped everyone off, except one person left in the ruins, you will still own that ruin and you will still get all the rewards until that one march is defeated. Speaking of rewards, you will get 40 individual honor per minute for each march in there, and you will get 15 coalition honor per minute for each march in there. The Ancient Ruins in this KVK last around, I think, an hour and a half, but they can last almost 2 to 3 hours sometimes, if I'm not mistaken, and they can give you a large amount of honor. The next thing to note about this event is that when you're fighting, it's not like a normal field fight. You can't just bring in 5 marchers. You can actually only bring in 1 at a time. So you can see right here, if I bring my Henry into the Ancient Ruins and I put my Boudica, let's say just in the pass as well, if I bring Henry in, it's not actually going to let me bring in Boudica because I can only bring in 1 march. I'm not allowed to bring any more. Even if I had a 7 march slot, I can only bring my Henry in. And the second he steps over that pass, I can't even bring my Boudica in. And even if he's walking out like this, let's say he's actually out of the pass. Okay, let's put my Boudica all the way back here. And let's say my Henry's walked out and I'd say I'm going to drag my Boudica into the altar. I'd say I drag her. She hasn't even walked in yet. I can't actually put my Henry back in. It will not let me until I change my Boudica's positioning, and then I can put Henry in. So keep in mind, you can't even put these 2 markers for a troop to go into the pass. I know I've glitched it before, only ever once. I somehow got 2 troops into the altar, completely broke the game. I don't actually know how I did it. But you can only ever have 1 march in there, unless you get the really weird glitch that I did, that I have no clue how, that didn't even let me walk around. I just had 2 troops standing there. So often you can only have 1 march in here. The only time I think this is an exception is in the Siege of Orleans, where you can actually basically have 5 marches because there is no pass stopping you. But often it's only going to be 1 march, and especially when it's a 1v1 like coalition versus coalition like this, it's definitely only going to be 1 march, and they're all coming in through that 1 pass. Now that we know how the event actually works, what do you do before you start fighting? And the first really simple tip is teleport close to the pass, because trust me, you're going to be refreshing your march a lot, and it is a long walk. From the ruins to your city, if you get a good spot, it might even be a 30-kilometer walk, and if you're all the way at the enemy pass holding them back, it can be up to a 50-kilometer walk, and that's going to take quite a while. Now imagine you weren't front seat like my city is. My city is right on that pass. Like, I cannot get any closer pretty much. I could maybe move like, 5 kilometers closer, but that's not going to change much. So make sure, first thing, the second pretty much you enter the zone with the level 6 pass, make sure you're allowed to teleport in, and then teleport as close to the pass as you can. So I recommend taking a nice prime spot in front of the pass if possible, so you can easily refresh your marches and constantly be fighting. the next thing I'd recommend doing before fighting is just doing what you normally do before a field fight. Pop yourself your normal defense or attack buffs, whichever one you choose. Make sure you got a rune, make sure your crystal tech is all in order, and make sure your equipment is in order. Really, really simple to prepare, but the main thing I can recommend is definitely having your city very close to the runes. The other thing I'd make sure you do is have both marches you would like to use next to the pass. So let's say, for example, I put my Henry and my ZHUGE next to the pass, and my Boudica and my Cyrus next to the pass. Let's just say I was running that. And that means, let's say my Henry, he was getting low and I decided to refresh him. The second my Henry leaves that pass, I can actually put my Boudica with the Cyrus in with pretty much no downtime. So it's going to allow me to easily cycle between the commanders. This is going to be much more convenient, especially if you didn't get a prime position like mine. Like, for example, with me, I could just pretty much start marching my Henry back, and by the time he left the pass, my Boudica would be at the pass, and I can easily send her back out straight into battle. But if you're a little bit further than me, maybe you're like back here for some reason, then I highly recommend the second your troop gets back to your city, send it back out and stand in front of that pass. So once your troop has to refresh that's inside of the actual ancient ruins, you can pull in your other troops, and there's pretty much no downtime between it. So make sure you got those 2 troops near the pass. You don't really need more. Often you'll find that 2 is more than enough. You may want to run 3 if you're really, really far away, but if you're quite close by, you can easily just send in those 2 marches, and it's going to be more than enough to easily cycle between them. Now that we know what you do before you even start fighting, what should you be fighting with? Out of all your commanders, which ones do you pick? Out of all your equipment, which equipment should you pick? Should you just run your normal 5-march murder ball and swap between them? What should you really do? Well, for a commander-wise, I highly recommend running commanders with a lot of march speed. A commander that's going to benefit from having a ton of march speed is going to be extremely, extremely powerful in the ruins. Like, they're going to be one of the most, if not the most powerful types of commanders. As an example, we've got Henry with 20% march speed outside of Alliance territory. The ruins do count as outside of Alliance territory, so they're going to benefit greatly from that. So any commanders who are really good in Ark of Osiris will often perform quite well in the ruins. Commanders who you can double up and synergize well together and have a lot of march speed. Another example is Nebu and Cyrus. I ran them a lot before. They work crazy good because they are ridiculously fast. Henry with Nebu, ridiculously fast, really, really strong. So if you can really stack up march speed on commanders, if you can get 2 really march speed heavy commanders, preferably a secondary with AoE such as Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to be in a really, really good position because you're going to have fast commanders with fairly high damage. And the good thing about that is, since this is the ancient ruins, you aren't running 5 marches to support your march, and you can pretty much put your full attention on that one march. So you can micro-optimize where it's turning, you can micro-optimize how you're swinging into the enemy murder ball. All that stuff you can pay extreme attention to, because whenever you hit an enemy with a 5-march murder ball, you're going to notice some of your marches will like swing around that way, some will swing around all the way to the left, and it gets very confusing. But with one march, you know where it's going to swing. It's going to swing right into the front of the enemy. And if you see, I'm running 2 marches, my Henry swung a little bit more, so it gets more and more confusing the more marches you run. But if I'm only running 1 march, I can fully focus on that, and that's where the march speed becomes really good. You can fully utilize its effectiveness, plus it's really good to have march speed when you're off Alliance territory, and especially if you don't have Alliance territory to fall back on, it can be extremely valuable because everyone is on an equal playing field there. You're never really going to have a ton more march speed than anyone because there's no Alliance territory buffs to fall back on. It's just you plus the open field. You have to have the march speed there to support you because you don't have the Alliance buffs there to support you. So that's why I really, really like march speed. Another thing that I can just say is fairly simply, a lot of the meta commanders are going to do good because this is still the open field. Like, there's no way around that. So commanders like Henry, commanders like Boudica, ZHUGE, they're really, really going to be a very, very powerful like combination. They're still going to do well. If they work well in the open field, they often will work well inside of the altars. The honorable mentions I will give to some commanders are definitely Henry. He's really strong with 20% march speed. As for infantry, I'm pretty sure Scipio and Alex are very, very fast commanders, especially Scipio. For a meta infantry commander, he is actually pretty quick. He can get up to 25% march speed if he's outside of Alliance territory. So really, really powerful commanders with a lot of march speed are definitely going to perform quite well. Now, I also would like to give an honorable mention to Cavs, purely because Cavs are just very fast. We know it. Nevsky's got a ton of march speed. Joan, I'm pretty sure, has some march speed in her kit as well when you're outside of Alliance territory. Ruins outside of Alliance territory. Hardshapping has march speed. William has march speed. So many Cav commanders have a ton of march speed. So if you have 2 good Cav commanders, 2 good Cav marches actually, you can easily cycle between those for the Ancient Ruins, and you're going to be able to get in and out of the fights really, really quickly, and it's going to be extremely powerful. And definitely they're going to get a nice hit to their effectiveness when they're inside of the Ancient Ruins compared to the open field, because once again, you can fully utilize the extra march speed they have, which is definitely going to give you a massive advantage over anybody that you're fighting. Now, out of everything I just said about those commanders, there is actually an exception to the rule, and the rule is make sure you're running your strongest commanders at the end of the day. If you've got a 5-5-1-1 Henry or an expertise Boudica with an expertise LIANG, then what are you going to run? Well, Henry might be better than Boudica in the ruins, but you've got an expertise Boudica. She's going to still perform better. And since you're only running 2 marches, you're looking for your best marches. I don't recommend running anything that is not the strongest you've got. If you've got a Boudica as your strongest commander currently, and a Nevsky as your strongest commander, then you're going to run that Boudica and you're going to run that Nevsky. Don't bother listening to any other combinations. Even though Henry might perform better in the Ancient Ruins, he's not going to perform better if he's not fully invested. If he doesn't have good equipment on, he's just not going to be up to that standard. So make sure you're running your literal best commanders. And if some of the commanders I did mention, you've got them and you're not really running them as a main open field commander, switch your equipment onto them. That's why my Henry is running my full legendary set. Usually my Boudica runs the full legendary set, but because Henry is going to be inside of the ruins, it kind of made sense. He's going to be my most powerful commander. I'm going to stack him up with gear and make him a really micro-optimized, extremely powerful commander. So try and micro-optimize those commanders as much as possible, and if possible, switch to the commanders that I mentioned. But if you don't have them at a high skill level, it's still perfectly fine to run just normal field marches. They might not trade as good, but they're still going to perform extremely well. Now, the next thing to discuss is what you actually do when you're finally fighting. When the fight has actually begun, what are some things you should notice, some tricks you might see that you shouldn't be falling for? And the first one is, don't get too close to the enemy pass. If possible, don't get right up in the pass, because the refresh time you need on your marches is the key thing to victory. If you're right up in the enemy's pass, they can walk back and forth within like 10 seconds, fully refresh their marches, and then come right back out. While you have to walk all the way back to your city on the other side of the map pretty much, you're pretty much screwed. So try and stick around this area right here at the furthest to the enemy's pass. Never ever really get right up in their pass, especially if you're a smaller group. Let's say it's you plus like 3 other people and you're considering pushing up to the enemy pass. I wouldn't recommend doing it. Just stick with the main murder ball. Often R4s and leaders of alliances won't get you up the enemy pass once the ruins are about to open. The only time you're really near the enemy pass is towards the beginning, when it's like we'll just keep them back as long as we can, and then we'll retreat towards the ruins, and then we'll hold them there. That's often what happens. You don't usually want to hang out around the enemy's pass unless they're really, really bad and you're absolutely destroying them. You're going to notice that you want to try and stick around this ruins area, and that also brings me into my next tip. Try and stick within the square if possible. If you're basically trying to attack your opponents, you want to stay in that square. If you're defending, you want to keep them out of the square. I think that's fairly simple. So if you're defending, I wouldn't go into the square. People will chase you in there. But if you are trying to attack, you want to try and push into that square. Now, I'm not saying dive your marches in like an absolute mad lad and just get them completely destroyed. Try and slowly creep your way up there until you get into the square so they can't claim the ruins. Because once they claim it, it is much more difficult to basically get it back off them. I don't think I've ever seen anybody take an ancient ruins from another alliance once they've fully claimed it, because it is literally almost impossible, to be honest. So if possible, try and stay within that square and keep applying pressure to your enemies. And then if you're able to push them fully out, don't go up to the pass, because I know often I see people push the enemies out of the ancient ruin and then they somehow end up at the pass, and it's like, you are now allowing them to get a chance to push back out. So if you can push them out, try and block them from the main entrance, or if they're coming in through the side entrances, try and block them from the side entrances. You can also, if you're an alliance leader in R4 watching this, try and guide people to actually attack from the side and flank the enemy. So for example, let's say you're defending right here. You can actually get people to go around like that and attack from the side, and it can kind of trap people in, and it's really difficult for opponents to break out of that unless they have a lot more people online. So if you've got a nice decent amount of players, you can actually attack from pretty much all angles into the ruins, and that's going to make it extremely difficult for your opponents to push through you and much easier for you to defend, because they're pretty much being swarmed in a full circle. The next tip I can give you is don't really chase low marches. Often if people are really fighting to get the ruins, what they'll do is they'll send in a low marcher. So they have a Nevsky with like 50k troops left. Let's say you're fighting like right where I am right now. You're fighting to defend right up here and your enemies are really pushing extremely hard. Then you might notice they start dive bombing their troops straight into the ruins, and you'll notice hundreds of players. Like I swear I've seen literally 80 marchers chase around a Nevsky before in the ancient ruins while everyone else is getting decimated. Do not chase those low marchers. They're either going to die, or they're going to end up back in their city, or they're going to sit in the ruins, and by the time it comes to take the ruins, you can wipe them out extremely easily. It is actually better to leave people with a lower HP march on the field because A, they deal way less damage, like they deal next to nothing. B, they take horrible trades if they get hit at all. And C, they're just going to be there to annoy you. They're not going to stop and fight you, especially if they've got a fast march. They're just going to be running around in circles, and they're really only there to disrupt everybody else so that their allies can push through. So make sure you're not really trying to chase around those rogue marchers. So let's say my Henry right now was low HP, and I slammed it straight through your murder ball and kept running. Don't chase me. It's just going to end up making your allies get absolutely destroyed, and you're going to be like the guy that's like, he's always chasing the low marchers and no one's going to like it. So try and stick away from chasing around those low HP marchers, because if you do, you're often going to find that the enemies get a chance to break through, and that's how it becomes an absolute brawl and no one ever gets the ruins. So try and make sure you're not chasing around those low HP marchers. I know they're very enticing and they give a ton of kills, but in the end, it's going to deeply affect your allies who are going to get swarmed down since a bunch of people started chasing a low HP march. The final tip I can give you is deciding whether or not you're going to go all the way down to 0 troops. Often people who do the ruins, there are two types of players. They're the players who refresh when they get to around half or red HP, which is what I personally do. And then there's the players who just run their troops into the ground, and both sides have their wins and losers. If you're really trying to capture the ruins and your alliance is really set on it, they're like, we have to get these ruins, then run your troops into the ground. You're going to get a fairly average trade if you do that, but it's going to at least give you a much better chance of capturing the ruins, since it is quite difficult to capture the ruins if people keep slamming their marchers straight through the enemy murder ball just so you can't capture the ruins. So if needed, you can definitely run your marchers all the way to 0, but if you are able to and you just want to be able to refresh, you can easily refresh your marchers by going back. I personally, in my live stream, was refreshing most of the time. I did run it into 0 like towards the end, and I ran it into 0 like once to do a test. But often what I'd personally recommend is the ancient ruins are not that important. They're fun. They're there for kills, really. They're not really there to capture it. Yes, they're going to give some good honor and stuff, but most players, you don't need that honor. It's not going to change too much. So what I do is just run your marches as you would in a normal field fight. Just get a little bit lower than usual because you will have to refresh. It's going to take some time. And then just march in the next march and do that all over again. Often you'll find, yes, there's like an extra minute downtime between fighting, but I think it is worth it to save yourself probably around an extra 200,000-300,000 save wounds each ruins. So in my opinion, I personally prefer not to run my marches into 0, but if you prefer to run them all the way to the ground, it definitely does help your alliance capture the ancient ruins. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing to the channel. I try to bring out a video like this every second day, whether it be related to new commanders, whether it be related to an event in the game, or just an overall guide. I try to push out some type of interesting content, and your subscriptions definitely support me to do that, because not only does YouTube like when you subscribe, I like when you subscribe. And to all the current subscribers, I thank you very much. And to all the people who just subscribed, I thank you as well. Now, I just want to say thank you much, and I hope to see you in the next one.